The theater was alive with energy that night, a restless hum of voices, footsteps, and anticipation echoing against the high ceiling. Spotlights scanned lazily across the audience, catching faces that glowed with expectation. For many in those seats, it was another evening of entertainment, a chance to witness talent and perhaps be surprised. For the judges sitting behind their sleek desk, it was routine, one more act among hundreds, another hopeful dreamer stepping into the fire of their scrutiny. But for one boy, waiting just off stage, it was everything. He stood in the wings with his heart pounding so hard it rattled in his chest. His hands were clammy, his grip on the microphone slick with nervous sweat. He wore clothes that had clearly been chosen with care but still looked humble, slightly faded jeans, a shirt too big for him, sneakers scuffed from wear. He didn't look like a star. He looked like a boy who had fought tooth and nail just to make it to this stage. His eyes darted toward the audience he couldn't yet see, then back to the floor as he whispered words to himself, a private pep talk drowned out by the roar of the crowd. The host introduced him with a name most had never heard before. There was polite applause, the kind given out of courtesy rather than excitement. The boy swallowed hard, stepped forward, and suddenly he was under the lights. The heat from them hit him instantly, making the sweat bead at his hairline, but he didn't falter. He walked to the center of the stage, the microphone trembling slightly in his hand, and turned toward the judges. From their table, the judges looked at him with practiced professionalism. One tilted her head, offering a smile meant to calm him, while another jotted something idly on a notepad. They had seen thousands of contestants, nervous ones, confident ones, dreamers who cracked under pressure. At first glance, this boy seemed fragile, almost too small for the massive stage that towered around him. Some members of the audience exchanged quick looks, silently wondering if he would manage to hold his own. The boy cleared his throat softly, adjusted the microphone, and took a shaky breath. The silence of the theater pressed down on him, heavy and expectant. From somewhere in the back rows came the faint sound of a cough, but otherwise the audience waited, eyes fixed on the young figure standing alone under the lights. Then the music began, the soft, familiar piano introduction to "See You Again." The moment the first notes echoed through the hall, a ripple of recognition passed through the crowd. It was a song that carried weight, one that had touched millions, a song tied to loss and remembrance. Choosing it was bold, for some, too bold. A song like that demanded not just talent but soul. If he faltered, it would show instantly. The boy closed his eyes, drew in a breath that trembled with both fear and determination, and opened his mouth. The first note slipped free like a fragile thread of sound, wavering at the edges but unmistakably full of emotion. The audience shifted, a few eyebrows raised. Some whispered softly, already sensing that something was different about this performance. As the verse unfolded, his voice steadied, though the rawness remained. It wasn't polished perfection, the kind of voice shaped by years of coaching. It was something deeper, something honest. Every lyric sounded as though it had been carved from his own memories. He didn't just sing the words, he carried them, like they were both a burden and a release. On the judges' panel, subtle changes rippled through their faces. One leaned forward, no longer casual but alert. Another tilted her head, her expression softening as the boy's voice trembled with unspoken pain. The third judge clasped his hands together, nodding slightly as if he had been taken by surprise. In the audience, the transformation was even clearer. Where there had been low whispers and restless movements, now there was stillness. People sat upright, their eyes glued to the boy on stage. The skeptics who had expected him to falter now watched with quiet awe. Phones began to lift, their screens glowing as people realized this was a moment worth capturing. The boy's knees no longer shook. His breathing steadied. The song carried him forward, and with each line, his confidence grew, not because he was trying to impress, but because he was finally letting go of everything he had held inside. His voice cracked once, faint but real, and instead of breaking the spell, it deepened it. The crowd felt it, that vulnerability, that human imperfection that made his performance more than just a song. By the time the verse ended, the boy's transformation was undeniable. The trembling, fragile figure who had walked onto the stage was gone. In his place stood someone who, for the first time, seemed to realize he belonged under those lights. The music swelled into the chorus, and the boy lifted his head, eyes opening as his voice reached upward with it. The judges exchanged glances, some with eyebrows raised, others with faint smiles tugging at their lips. In the audience, whispers had been replaced by silence, every soul waiting to see what this boy would give them next. And as he stepped into the heart of the chorus, the air in the theater shifted. The performance was no longer just about a contestant singing a song. It was about a boy finally being heard, finally stepping out of the shadows, finally showing the world what lived inside his heart. The moment the chorus began, something shifted inside him. It was as though the stage itself disappeared, along with the thousands of eyes locked on him. The lights, the cameras, the judges, everything faded. All that remained was the music, and the way it tugged at the memories he had kept buried for so long. His voice, once fragile and hesitant, swelled with emotion that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't the smooth, polished sound of a seasoned performer. It was raw, imperfect, and heartbreakingly human. Every note carried the weight of longing, of grief, of love remembered and lost. As he sang the line about seeing someone again, his chest tightened, and his throat almost closed. He could feel the lump rising, threatening to silence him. But instead of holding it back, he leaned into it. His voice cracked slightly, a fracture that pierced through the room. The audience gasped at the vulnerability in that sound, and then the silence deepened, broken only by the boy's voice soaring against the piano's steady rhythm. The judges were no longer watching passively. One had her hand pressed against her lips, her eyes wide and glassy, as though she was trying not to break down. Another leaned forward, elbows on the desk, staring at the boy with unblinking intensity, nodding to himself as though he understood every ounce of pain in the lyrics. The toughest judge, the one known for his cutting remarks, had shifted in his seat. His jaw worked, and though he tried to maintain composure, his eyes betrayed him. They were moist, shining under the harsh lights. Out in the audience, the transformation was even more profound. People who had entered the theater as casual spectators were now clutching tissues, wiping at their eyes. Strangers reached for the hands of those next to them, as though the performance had pulled something vulnerable out of everyone at once. Even the restless murmurs of children had ceased, their young eyes fixed on the boy with the same intensity as the adults around them. The boy himself felt the shift too. Each note seemed to strip away a layer of fear, leaving him exposed but strangely free. He wasn't performing anymore, he was confessing. The words weren't just lyrics, they were pieces of his own story, his own longing to see someone he missed more than anything. He tilted his head back slightly, closed his eyes, and let the music carry him higher. The tears that had gathered at the corners of his eyes finally slipped free, tracing lines down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. He let the audience see him, unguarded and honest. When the second chorus hit, his voice expanded, stronger now, resonating in every corner of the theater. It was no longer fragile, it was a cry from the heart, filled with pain but also hope. The power of it made people in the back rows stand to their feet, clapping softly in encouragement even before the song had ended. The boy, lost in his emotions, barely registered it. He sang as though he was alone in the world, speaking to someone unseen but deeply loved. By the bridge, the entire auditorium was on the edge of collapse. People sniffled openly. The camera operators, usually detached professionals, exchanged glances with red-rimmed eyes. Crew members watching from the wings stood frozen, some mouthing the lyrics along with him, their voices cracking from their own emotions. The song, already powerful in its original form, had transformed into something intimate and deeply personal in his hands. And then came the moment that silenced even the sound of tears, the final build-up. The piano swelled, and the boy gripped the microphone tighter, his knuckles white. He leaned forward slightly, eyes still shut, as if the world around him didn't exist. His voice rose, trembling but unstoppable, pushing past every crack and every break until it filled the room like a storm. The audience, unable to contain themselves, began applauding mid-song, shouting encouragement. "You've got this," someone yelled, their voice breaking with emotion. The judges clapped softly along, not as critics but as supporters, their professionalism abandoned in the face of such raw authenticity. The boy's voice cracked again, this time louder, but he refused to stop. That imperfection became the most perfect thing about the performance. It was real, it was human, it was unforgettable. When the chorus ended, and the music softened for the final verse. The boy's entire body trembled with exhaustion. He had given everything he had, poured every hidden tear and silent prayer into the song. His voice, though softer now, carried a kind of peace that spread through the audience like a balm. By the time he reached the final line, the auditorium was drenched in silence again, every heart caught in the gravity of his performance. His voice faded, lingering in the air like smoke after a fire, and then there was nothing, just the boy standing under the spotlight, tears glistening on his cheeks, breathing hard. And in that fragile pause, the audience understood they had witnessed something extraordinary. For a heartbeat, the theater was utterly still. The last note had faded into the rafters, leaving only the echo of its weight in the air. The boy stood there, chest rising and falling with each shallow breath, his fingers still curled around the microphone stand as if it were the only thing anchoring him to reality. His eyes darted between the floor and the audience, unsure if he had done enough. Unsure if they had felt what he felt. And then, all at once, the silence shattered. The audience erupted, a wave of sound crashing forward like a tidal surge. People leapt to their feet, clapping so furiously their palms stung, screaming words of praise that were swallowed by the roar of applause. The ovation was instant, thunderous, and overwhelming. It wasn't the polite acknowledgement given to most contestants, it was the kind of response reserved for moments people knew they would never forget. The boy's eyes widened, and his lips parted in disbelief. He stumbled back half a step, tears already threatening to spill again. He had walked onto the stage as a nobody, expecting skepticism, maybe even pity. But here he was, drowning in a sea of love and admiration that he had never imagined could be his. The judges rose to their feet almost in unison. The first judge clapped with a trembling smile, wiping at her cheeks between applauses. The second pointed toward the boy, nodding fiercely, his eyes shining with pride. The third, the one known for his brutal honesty, didn't clap immediately. Instead, he pressed his hand against his heart, his eyes locked on the boy with an expression so raw it stunned the audience. Then, slowly, he began to clap too, loud, deliberate, undeniable. The boy's body shook as he pressed his free hand over his mouth, trying to hold back sobs. He looked out at the rows of faces, all blurred by his tears, and still the sound of their cheers shook the floor beneath him. For a moment, it was almost too much. His knees bent, and he nearly collapsed under the weight of it all. And then, in a split second that would change everything, the first judge slammed her palm down on the golden buzzer. The crowd exploded into an even greater frenzy. A loud metallic clang reverberated through the speakers as the button locked in place, and then from the ceiling, gold confetti burst forth. It fell like stardust, sparkling under the stage lights, swirling around the boy as if the universe itself had crowned him. His hand dropped from his mouth, his expression frozen in shock. His eyes widened further, his chest hitched, and then the sobs came, unstoppable and unfiltered. He dropped to his knees as the golden storm rained down on him. The confetti stuck to his damp cheeks, clung to his hair, settled in his trembling hands. He looked up through the glittering cascade, and for the first time, he smiled, a smile so pure, so disbelieving, that it broke the last defenses of anyone still holding back tears. The judges clapped and cheered, shouting over the noise. The second judge banged his fists on the desk, grinning through his tears. The third judge, usually unshakable, leaned back in his chair, hands on his head, laughing in amazement as tears streamed freely down his face. They weren't judges anymore. They were witnesses, as stunned and moved as everyone else. The host rushed onto the stage, pulling the boy up from his knees. He wrapped an arm around his shaking shoulders, whispering something encouraging that couldn't be heard over the roar of the crowd. The boy clung to him for balance, still crying, still staring at the raining gold as though he were trapped in a dream he was terrified to wake from. Meanwhile, the audience recorded everything. Phones lit the room like stars, capturing his breakdown, the golden confetti, the judges' tears, the standing ovation. Already, those videos would be spreading beyond the walls of the theater, shared and reshared by strangers who hadn't even been there but would soon feel like they had. The boy looked toward the judge's desk again. They all stood for him, applauding, their faces shining with pride. One of them leaned into the microphone and shouted over the chaos, "You've just given us one of the most powerful performances we've ever seen. You didn't just sing that song, you lived it." And now the whole world will never forget you. The words hit him harder than the confetti, harder than the applause. His tears flowed freely, but his smile stayed, shaky and bright. He nodded slowly, mouthing a quiet, "Thank you," though it was lost in the thunder around him. The golden storm kept falling, the cheers kept rising, and the boy stood taller now. Still trembling, still overwhelmed, but no longer the invisible, nervous kid who had stepped onto the stage. He had been transformed by this moment. In the shower of gold and the roar of 1,000 voices, he had become unforgettable. As the music swelled in the background, the boy finally lifted the microphone again, not to sing but to whisper words the cameras barely caught. "This is for you." He tilted his face upward, eyes closed, as if sending that message beyond the stage, beyond the audience, to the very person he had sung for. The confetti sparkled as it fell around him, the audience still cheering, the judges still standing, the host still holding him close. It was more than a performance. It was a miracle, a memory etched forever in golden light. And for the boy, it was the first moment he truly believed he belonged.